right there, okay? That's kind of condensed, but each one of these is a cardiac cycle, okay? Each spike that you see there is a cardiac cycle. So if this was a beat-to-beat arterial pressure, what is this top line here? That's exactly right. So this is systolic blood pressure. And what's this?
Diastolic.
Diastolic. What do you see here?
Is that the mean?
Mean. That's exactly right. Okay?
Why is he at, is that right? Is he at 40 millimeters mercury?
So this person is, so now that's an interesting point. Is that accurate?
I don't think
So sometimes this can be, the absolute values can be problematic. Over time, it tracks at times. So guess what we have to do to correct that?
so. You gotta raise them all up a certain amount.
So you take a brachial blood pressure and then adjust it to the brachial blood pressure. Okay?
Is it low because it's all the way in the figure?
So this is low because it just happens to be low in this person. So
But that was actually.
that's an MS patient, yeah. So that's actually this person's blood pressure. Her blood pressure was about 50 diastolic. So you stand her up. But the interesting thing in that she was on medications that was doing that. So. But this is the device that we use downstairs to look at that, and it's the same thing that we just saw. Here. Okay? It's just condensed. Okay? So you're looking at what? 2 heartbeats here. We looked at 60 seconds in that tracing downstairs, right? Okay? And so now you can look at blood pressure control because you're looking at a cardiac cycle, each cardiac cycle. So what we see is with the neck pressure, neck suction, it's a stimulus that simulates hypotension. So it's tricking the brain into thinking your blood pressure dropped. And then for about 5 or 6 beats, we actually see blood pressure go back up. But we wouldn't be able to look at that with a cuff because it happens too fast. And we can do this non-invasively without an art line or a catheter in there because I'm not a cardiologist and they frown about us putting art lines in people. So you can imagine us downstairs running catheters into your heart so that we can get arterial blood pressures. Lance doesn't want to go over to the IEM with Dr. Levine, who's a cardiologist, to get a catheter. Imagine how much fun it would be down with me and Dusty down there threading catheters in the heart. You want to do that? That's why.
I'm not keen on catheters being inserted into my person.
It would seem that a person that is going into science would be keen about, this is talking about Stephen Hawking.
I'll stick catheters into other people, just
Oh.
not myself.
Interesting. So you aren't willing to go through the procedures yourself, but you're willing to do it to other people.
I'm like a couple nuts and blow Nazi scientists. Wouldn't want the procedures done on me.
Yeah, that's interesting. Huh. Remember that, boys and girls, when Lance goes and does his PhD work and wants you to do a study with him. Say, have you done the study yourself, sir? And then you go, when he goes, I'd rather not do it on myself. That's a red flag that you
Yeah.
shouldn't do it, Andy.
Yeah, huge
So the
red
reason
flag.
that we do all these things is because we've done the MS patients before. And usually I don't have to do it because be honest, I get paid way too much money in the lab. And if I were to die during a cardiac catheterization, the lab would shut down. Now, if I kill Dusty, we just throw him out in the bushes, let the cats in here. And then the lab doesn't miss a beat. You're exactly right. So, or we get an undergraduate, let's say like Lance, that is really worthless, and if he dies, no one cares in regards to that. Okay?
Dr. Wayne would be very upset with you.
Would he?
He would.
Do you think so?
That man loves me.
Really? I don't know. I would have to say, I would beg to differ. But $40,000, this too could be your blood pressure device, Simon. I'll tell you why. Yeah.
The cards are pretty expensive.
Why don't we get to use it more? I barely let you have stethoscopes and cuffs, let alone this. You have all your fake tan rubbed off on it. I wouldn't
Did
really-
any valuable like research, like data come from like the Nazi regime?
Did?
Yeah,
Oh,
did
yeah.
anything like, did anything somebody that we use like in like cite and research
No, I
today?
mean, you can't use it because it didn't meet the standard. That's why we have IRB.
No, I mean, but you can't like cite it.
Can't cite
Can't
it.
say it, but people still learn from it.
Well, like, what are some things that like actually came out of that?
So one of the things from our research is it's how you respond to thermal stress. So they threw people off ships in icy water to see how long they could survive. Then they would pluck some of them back in and see what was their core temperature and then throw them back in and things like that. Yeah, so scientifically, yeah, there was probably some exceptional data there, but ethically, you can't use it. So, you can't use it at all because the people that were there didn't give their consent. So, the other thing, that's why you can't do also, which you guys may or may not know, but prison population, you can't do research on a prison population because they're vulnerable. And you could coerce them into doing stuff that is not cool. And so if you look at, go back to, how many people know who Whitey Bulger is?
Let's go wrestler.
No. Whitey Bulger is a big-time gangster in Boston. So he was, how many people have seen The Departed? Oh, wrestler.
Oh no.
Nobody's seen The Departed?
No.
Anybody see Black Mass with Johnny Depp? What the hell do you people watch?
Not Johnny Depp.
You
Oh,
gotta,
I might have seen that one.
Departed. You gotta watch The Departed with
I
Jack
think I
Nicholson.
have seen it.
That's a great movie. So that's about Whitey Bulger. But Whitey Bulger, in the 40s, he was in prison, and they gave him LSD, psychoactive drugs, to see what it did to people. Well, you can't do that anymore because prison population are a vulnerable population. Now, done by the Nazis, that's even worse because those people didn't do it, and you were going to death. And we joke about throwing you to the cats and having a cat colony here.
Yeah, I did that though.
They frown upon it. Well, so a lot of things to that.
We're
Think
trying
about
to-
the people that were in that exposed to vaccines and things like that. Or, for instance, they had people that were when they were testing the atomic bomb, they were just bombing stuff out in the desert out in New Mexico and Nevada, and there were people out there. And they wanted to see what happened to the exposure. Well, I will tell you what happened is they got cancer and they died, and so the government ended up doing that. You'll see tons of this happen with that is did it with African Americans in syphilis vaccines, and so no, you can't use that data. So is it scientifically valuable? Yes.
Can you
We
use
learned a lot of things at a horrific price.
can you use stuff from like the Stanford prisoner study?
If they didn't follow the ethical standards of science, and sometimes you'll see in a paper, you'll see something about meeting the expectations of the university, IRB, and then something in there will say Declaration of Helsinki. That's
Uh-huh.
actually a universal accord that everybody has agreed to, saying that there wasn't harm done to these individuals while you were getting that information. So some of the Stanford stuff, if they did not give consent, you can't use it.
Well, they did give it was done on college students, and they put half of them in like
Yeah,
prisoner like roles.
That's
and then
different though, is that one was consent-wise, but now it doesn't meet the ethical
Yeah.
standards of research currently.
because there was like abuse.
Yeah, so that's exactly right. It should have been approved by the institution at the time. It was, and then the researchers went off the reservation basically in order to do that, okay? So hypertension, we talked a little bit about this. Anything over 140/90, I think that has actually been lowered now to a lower standard by American Heart Association. I think it's 130/85, isn't it? 130/85? Yeah. So, but you can imagine now, if you think about the Wiggers diagram, is your body now has to overcome that higher pressure. In order for flow to go from high pressure to low pressure, and you've increased the pressure in the aorta, your heart now has to work harder in order to overcome that pressure. So, do you have hypertension? Does anybody have hypertension in here? When you guys did your blood pressures, were your blood pressures normal? That's good. Jackson Davis currently is not in that case. That's why he had an issue at the start of the semester, is his blood pressure, for whatever reason, is high. So what does he have to do? He's on meds. So he is on a Ang2 or an ACE inhibitor to block so that his blood pressure goes down. Good news is his blood pressure is about 110/65 on some days. So I'm surprised he doesn't get lightheaded and pass out when he gets up in there. But more importantly, it's an issue when he exercises. And so he has to be on that hypertension medication. So is that a HIPAA violation that I'm telling you about my sons? I don't think so, because I think I control his information, and plus it's learning. Did I just commit what we just talked about?
I have to report you.
That's fine. He wouldn't care. So that's the good news is, be like, yeah, whatever. So, you guys know what this is, risk factors and all that stuff, but the key in this is, your heart now has to work harder. And so now you'll get, in order to generate those higher pressures to get flow to go out of the heart, you're gonna have some other problems, specifically left ventricular hypertrophy. So we talked about hypertrophy in regards to skeletal muscle, and it was good, right? Hypertrophy, big muscles. You really don't want your heart muscle to get very big because it's in a confined space, and now it's going to affect the efficiency of how it's ejecting. And so this is what happened to Elmer. Elmer had a disease, pericarditis, some kind of infection that affected his muscle, and then his muscle had to work harder to do what it was supposed to do, ended up having left ventricular hypertrophy, and had a heart similar to that of a person in heart failure. His left ventricular or left ventricle wasn't working efficiently, okay? And what ended up happening? He wasn't able to do anything. How long was he in bed? Yeah, I think it was 8 months, wasn't it? 5 to 8 months. So it was a long time, I know that. And we go back to that first day in class. What happens when you do 18 days of bed rest? 3 weeks is equivalent to what?
You age like 30 years?
30 years of aging. Now you got a guy that has a seriously old heart that's been in bed for 5 to 8 months. And his VO2, what did he say his VO2 was?
Like 7, something like that?
Yeah, dropped. I think it was started out at 13 and then it slowly dropped to 9.
Yeah.
Okay? What's resting? And this is mLs per kg per minute. What's resting? 3.5 is a little supine lying in bed. So think about that. That dude could not get up and walk to the bathroom without being maximally taxed. Okay? And then he got his new heart. Okay? So this long-term regulation, we talked about that a little bit. This is where Jackson Davis is right now. Is we are regulating his blood pressure through his blood volume by regulating how his kidneys are functioning. Okay? This right here is interesting in regards to the sympathetic nerve activity, because what happened in short-term regulation to increase blood pressure, which we're going to need to exercise, one of the things that happened to Elmer is what? What did they do? They cut everything. All the nerves that control the heart. Okay? And so one of the things he said was that he would go upstairs and then he would sit at a table and his blood pressure didn't increase, or his heart rate didn't increase, and then all of a sudden it would increase. Sitting down 5 to 10 minutes after he walked up the stairs. Why? That's exactly right. So now, instead of the nerves releasing norepinephrine to stimulate sympathetic activity on the heart instantaneously, it had to come through the adrenal glands, circulate through the blood, get to the heart muscle, and then increase heart rate. So it didn't work out very well because he was done exercising and all of a sudden his heart rate went up, right? And his heart rate was 100 beats per minute, he said, right? Resting heart rate. It's down lower, which is amazing. We'll talk about that later. What's going on there?
That says 40, 80, 100. It's going to naturally go to 100 max for
Flip it the other way around.
100
SA is 100, AV is 40. So, but that doesn't matter because we cut the vagus nerve. So now, what's happening is, the reason he's beating at 100 beats per minute is the heart that he was given, their SA node is beating at 100 beats per minute. Because he has no control over his heart rate. Okay? And then if he does, it's got to come from the adrenal glands and circulate through the blood to get to the skeletal muscle as opposed to having neural innervation in the heart. Really screws up your ability to exercise, doesn't it? Yeah, but he still does it. And what's interesting is now, what's his heart rate? 53. So what has to happen? Nerves have to be regrowing in the heart. They didn't think that happened. So absolutely amazing stuff that happened with Velma. Okay? That's why I wanted you guys to hear that, because it fits in with exactly what we're going to talk about. So the next thing that we talk about are factors that influence or conduction in the heart, and then we are going to get into hemodynamics, baby, talking about where all this blood goes. So on Wednesday, we're going to hit it hard again. And I might slobber on somebody. Get so excited. It's too hard to slobber back here, but I'll turn my head and slobber on Carmen. How do you know how can you judge my excitement if I'm not spitting on people, Carmen? Come on.